Okay, so today we're going deep on Larry Page.
Sounds good.
Co-founder of Google,
Yeah.
huge name in tech. And we've got a pretty fascinating set of sources to work with here.
Yeah, really rich stuff. I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah, our mission, I think, is to really unearth the things that most people don't know about Larry Page.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, what were the key moments, the influences, the ideas that shaped not just his path, but, Google itself?
Yeah, going from, essentially a curious kid to this like tech revolutionary.
Right, exactly. And I think the sources you've pulled together give us a real chance to understand the why behind those pivotal decisions, those early sparks of inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start at the beginning. I mean, Lawrence Edward Page, born March 26, 1973, Lansing, Michigan.
Okay.
And right away, you get the sense that his childhood was like immersed in this world of computers and tech and scientific thinking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, both his parents were deeply involved in computer science. His father, Carl Victor Page Sr., actually got his PhD and was a pioneer at AI. Oh. Yeah, and his mother, Gloria, taught computer programming. So it was like computers were the family business.
Yeah, like built into their DNA almost. And, it's interesting. His mother was Jewish, his father's family Protestant, but they raised him in a secular household.
Interesting.
And even though his parents divorced when he was 8, he stayed close to both of them.
Okay, so strong family ties despite the split.
Yeah, and their home, like people described it as this kind of chaotic haven of learning,
Right.
a mess with computers and science and tech magazines everywhere.
Wow, so he was surrounded by all this stuff constantly.
Totally. And apparently he was an avid reader, like just consuming information from a really young age.
So that kind of natural curiosity paired with access to all that knowledge, that's a potent combination.
Right. And it wasn't just books and magazines. He was really hands-on, too. Like, he played musical instruments, studied composition.
Oh, wow.
Which he later credited for developing his impatience and obsession with speed in computing.
That's interesting. Like, he saw a connection between music and tech.
Yeah. He felt that the need for precision and timing in music was kind of like a parallel to the need for efficiency in technology.
Huh. That makes sense in a way. Like, things have to flow smoothly.
Totally. And on top of all that, he started playing with computers when he was just 6 years old.
6 years old. Wow.
Yeah, and get this. He was the first kid in his elementary school to turn in an assignment that was word processed.
Oh, wow. So ahead of the curve already.
Totally. And it wasn't enough for him to just use technology. He had to take it apart and figure out how it worked.
Like a true tinkerer.
Yeah, he and his brother Carl Jr. were always dismantling things. Radios, TVs, anything they could get their hands on.
Just to see the guts of it all.
Exactly. And by the time he was 12, he knew he wanted to invent things and start a company. Like, talk about having a clear vision early on.
Yeah. That's pretty remarkable. 12 years old and already thinking about entrepreneurship.
It's wild, right? So his education was kind of this mix of traditional schooling and exploring his passions. He went to Okemos Montessori School, then East Lansing High School, and even spent some summers at the Interlochen Center for the Arts, focusing on music, flute, saxophone.
So that artistic side was definitely nurtured alongside the technical.
Right. And then I was on to the University of Michigan, where he got his Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering with honors in 1995.
So he was excelling in a really demanding field.
Yeah. And even during his undergrad years, you see these flashes of his innovative thinking and problem-solving skills. He built an inkjet printer out of Legos.
What? A Lego printer?
Yeah, he basically reverse engineered the ink cartridge and figured out the electronics and mechanics to make it work.
That's crazy.
I know, right? And then he also came up with this whole proposal to replace the university's bus system with a personal rapid transit system.
Like driverless cars on a track.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And on top of all that, he developed a business plan for a software-based music synthesizer company.
So we see the entrepreneurial drive, the tech savvy.
Yeah.
And still that connection to music.
It all kind of comes together there. And then after Michigan, he went on to Stanford for his master's in computer science, got that in 98, and then enrolled in the PhD program, and that's where the seeds of Google were really planted.
Right, the genesis of the whole thing.
So his PhD research focused on this problem of trying to figure out which web pages were the most important by looking at which other pages linked to them.
Okay, so like the idea of backlinks as a measure of authority.
Yeah, exactly. He saw this parallel between backlinks on the web and citations in academic research,
I see. Like, if a paper is cited a lot, it's probably influential.
Right, and that's when Sergey Brin, another PhD student at Stanford, came into the picture.
Okay, so their paths collide.
Yeah, they started working together on this research project, which they initially called Backrub.
Backrub, okay. Not the catchiest name.
No, not quite. But they were onto something really big, and together they co-authored this super influential paper called The Anatomy of a Large-Scale Hypertextual Web Search Engine.
So they were already starting to think about search in a really different way.
Right, and the core of Page's thinking was this idea that the structure of the web itself was based on links acting as citations.
Like the web is essentially a giant network of interconnected ideas.
Exactly. And he realized that if you could figure out a way to count and qualify the value of each backlink that pointed to a website, you could organize the web in a way that had never been done before.
Right, because before that, search engines were mostly just looking at the content on the pages themselves.
Yeah, they weren't really taking into account the relationships between pages.
And Brin was drawn to this project. Why?
Well, I think he was really fascinated by the sheer scale of it.
Yep.
You know, the web was this vast, uncharted territory at that point, and he loved the idea of working with something so massive and complex.
I could see that being appealing.
Yeah, and beyond that, he and Page just had a good rapport. They clicked intellectually and enjoyed working together.
A classic partnership story.
Right, and so out of this collaboration came the PageRank algorithm, which was the real breakthrough that set them apart.
So this is where it all starts to come together.
Yeah, they realized that they needed a way to turn all this raw backlink data into a measure of a web page's importance, and that's what PageRank did.
So they weren't just counting backlinks, they were figuring out which ones carried more weight.
Exactly, and they knew that this could potentially create a search engine that was far superior to anything else out there.
A real game changer.
Totally. And get this, they started building all of this in their dorm rooms.
No way, seriously.
Yeah, Page's dorm room became their little makeshift computer lab, and then Brin's room became their office and programming center.
Like a classic tech startup story just set in a dorm.
Right, and they were really resourceful. They used spare computer parts scrounged up from wherever they could find them to connect their system to Stanford's network.
Hacking it together.
Yeah, and their first search page was super basic, like really bare bones because they didn't have a web developer at that point.
Function over form.
Totally. They just wanted something that worked, and by August 1996, they had the first version of Google up and running, still on Stanford's website.
So the world's first glimpse of Google.
Yeah, and it was still called Backrub at that point, but it was already showing the core functionality, you know, ranking backlinks by importance.
The essence of Google was there.
Yeah, and they started to realize they had built something pretty special. By mid-1998, they were getting around 10,000 searches per day.
Wow, so it was catching on.
It was, and that's when they knew they had to take this to the next level.
Go from research project to a full-fledged company.
Exactly. And some people have even compared their vision to Johannes Gutenberg and the invention of the printing press.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, like their idea of organizing the world's information was seen as that transformative.
It did democratize access to information in a way that's hard to overstate.
Right. And they were already thinking beyond just web pages. You know, they talked about digitizing books, expanding access to health information.
So a really broad and ambitious scope from the very beginning?
Totally. So in 1998, they officially incorporated Google Inc., and the name actually came from Google, which is the number one followed by 100 zeros.
Google. That's a pretty fitting name, considering the amount of information they were dealing with.
Right, and they started out in the now legendary Susan Wojcicki's garage in Menlo Park for $1,700 a month.
The birthplace of Google.
Yeah, Page became CEO, Brin was president, and their mission statement was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful.
Simple but powerful.
Right. And they got a $1 million loan from friends and family, moved to a bigger office in Mountain View by early 2000.
Because things were starting to move quickly.
Yeah. And Page was really focused on the technical side of things. You know, he was already experimenting with server technology in 1999 to make Google as fast as possible.
Speed was always paramount to him.
Absolutely. And it paid off. By June 2000, Google had indexed 1 billion internet URLs, which was the most comprehensive index at the time.
That's incredible for that era.
It was. And as CEO, Page had some pretty unique ideas about management.
Like what?
Well, in 2001, he actually proposed getting rid of all project managers.
What? Seriously?
Yeah, he felt that engineers shouldn't be supervised by people who weren't engineers.
An interesting perspective.
Right. He believed that non-engineers just couldn't fully grasp the technical nuances.
Makes sense in a way.
Yeah, but it obviously caused some friction and ultimately didn't happen.
I can imagine.
But his core management principles were really interesting. He believed in doing things yourself, not hindering progress if you weren't adding value.
Okay.
He encouraged engineers to talk directly to each other, valuing ideas over seniority, respecting junior team members, and always trying to find a better solution rather than just saying no.
Those are surprisingly timeless principles even today.
I know, right? And he was obsessed with speed, constantly pushing for faster search results and a clean, simple homepage to minimize load times.
Makes sense. The faster, the better.
Exactly. So by this point, Google was growing super fast, and there was pressure from investors to bring in someone with more management experience.
So even though Page had this incredible vision, investors wanted someone more seasoned.
Yeah, initially he resisted the idea, but after talking with people like Steve Jobs and Intel's Andrew Grove, he started to come around.
Those are some pretty persuasive figures.
Right, and that's what led to Eric Schmidt becoming CEO in August 2001, with Page taking on the role of president of products.
So a bit of a power shift.
Yeah, and Google went through a period of huge growth under Schmidt, culminating in their IPO in 2004.
But Page was still very influential, right?
Oh, absolutely. Schmidt consulted with him on all the major decisions, and Page had final approval on all new hires.
So he was still shaping the company even without the CEO title?
Yeah, and he also personally signed the IPO paperwork, which made him a billionaire at the age of 30.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty incredible. And then came one of Google's most important moves, the acquisition of Android in 2005.
Ah, yes, Android, the little operating system that could.
Right. It was Page's idea to buy Android for $50 million, and he reportedly did it without even telling Schmidt at first.
He saw that mobile was going to be huge.
Yeah, he wanted to make sure that Google was at the forefront of the mobile revolution.
Smart move.
Yeah, and he was really passionate about Android. He worked closely with Andy Rubin, the co-founder.
And Android just exploded in popularity.
It did. By 2010, it had overtaken Apple in market share.
Really? Wow.
And it became the dominant mobile operating system worldwide.
A major win for Page and Google.
Totally. So fast forward to 2011, and Page decides to return as CEO.
What prompted that?
Well, by then, Google was massive, over $180 billion market cap and 24,000 employees.
Yeah, a completely different beast from the early days.
Right, and there was this sense that maybe Page had become a bit less involved in the day-to-day operations during the Schmidt era.
Like he was focusing more on the big picture.
Yeah, so when he took back the reins on April 4th, 2011, he wanted to shake things up a bit.
In what way?
Well, he wanted to give division executives more autonomy and promote more collaboration and unity across the company.
So streamline things and break down silos.
Exactly. He formed the L team, which was a group of senior VPs reporting directly to him.
Okay.
And he reorganized senior management to have these CEO-like figures leading key product areas.
Like a more decentralized structure?
Yeah. And he also wanted to consolidate Google's products and applications and give them a consistent aesthetic overhaul.
Like a brand refresh.
Yeah. And internally, this was called Project Kennedy, inspired by his love for moonshot projects, you know, those big, ambitious things.
Right, like going to the moon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He also became known for his toothbrush test for acquisitions.
The toothbrush test.
Yeah, he believed that a good acquisition should be something that you use once or twice a day, and that actually makes your life better.
Huh. Like a very practical measure.
Right. And he also saw the rise of Facebook and decided to launch Google Plus in mid-2011.
Google's answer to Facebook.
Yeah, it gained some traction at first, but ultimately couldn't compete with Facebook's dominance.
Right.
And then there was the big acquisition of Motorola Mobility in August 2011 for $12.5 billion.
That was a huge deal.
It was, and the main reason behind it was to get their hands on Motorola's patents to protect Android from lawsuits.
So a defensive move.
Yeah. Companies like Microsoft and Apple were going after Android with patent infringement claims.
Right.
And Page saw this as a threat. So they bought, Motorola got the patents, and then later sold off the handset division to Lenovo.
Interesting. So they got what they needed and moved on.
Yeah. And Page was also pushing this 10x mentality within Google.
And X, what's that?
It was this idea that they shouldn't just try to make things incrementally better. They should aim to make them 10 times better.
Wow, that's a high bar.
It is. But he believed in setting ambitious goals. He famously said, if you're not doing some things that are crazy, then you're doing the wrong things.
Like a kind of calculated risk-taking.
Yeah, and he often cited YouTube and Android as examples of projects that seemed crazy at first, but ended up being huge successes.
Right.
He was also outspoken about his concerns for internet freedom. You know, he talked about things like the SOPA bill and this ITU proposal, which he saw as potential threats to the open internet.
So he was willing to take a stand on those issues.
Yeah, and at the 2013 I/O Developer Conference, he gave this really interesting talk where he said, we're maybe at 1% of what is possible with technology.
Wow, only 1%.
Yeah, he felt like we were just scratching the surface. And he also took a few jabs at competitors, like criticizing Microsoft for their lack of backward compatibility with Outlook.
A little competitive banter.
Yeah, and he even mentioned that he was interested in attending Burning Man.
Burning Man, interesting.
Yeah, it seemed like he was curious about these unconventional experiences outside the tech bubble.
Makes sense.
And that same year, 2013, he launched Calico, which was Google's big venture into biotechnology.
Calico, what was that about?
They were focused on human health and aging research, trying to understand the science of aging and extend human lifespan.
Wow. So like anti-aging research.
Yeah, pretty much. And they brought in Art Levinson from Genentech and Apple to be the CEO.
So serious investment.
It was. And Page also talked about Elon Musk and SpaceX and how he wanted Google to be more involved in solving big world-changing problems.
Like tackling climate change or space exploration.
Yeah, and he drew this interesting parallel between pure invention, like what Nikola Tesla did, and the need to build companies to commercialize those inventions and bring them to the masses.
Right, because an invention doesn't really help anyone if it stays locked away in a lab.
Totally. So then in October 2014, he decided to restructure management again.
Again?
Yeah, he wanted to step back from the day-to-day product decisions and focus on those next generation of ambitious projects, Google X, energy access, smart home automation, biotech.
Oh, the really futuristic stuff.
Exactly. And Sundar Pichai took on more responsibility for Google's core products.
Setting the stage for Pichai's eventual rise to CEO.
Right. And Page still saw his role as CEO as being the one to push people forward, inspire them to think bigger and bolder.
That makes sense.
And then in August 2015, he announced the creation of Alphabet Inc., which would be the new parent company for Google and all their other ventures.
Alphabet. So that's where that name came from.
Yeah, Page became CEO of Alphabet, Pichai became CEO of Google, and the idea was to give each of these businesses more independence and make Google more focused.
So a way to manage this sprawling empire that Google had become.
Right, and the name Alphabet was chosen because it represents language, the foundation of search, and also because it's a play on alphabet, which implies investment returns above the benchmark.
Perfect.
Yeah, as CEO of Alphabet, Page was often described as this futurist focused on the long-term moonshot projects.
So he was really thinking decades ahead.
Yeah, and then in December 2019, he stepped down as CEO of Alphabet with Sundar Pichai taking over.
So both he and Sergey Brin stepped back from those leadership roles.
Yeah, they said it was because Alphabet was well established and the subsidiaries could operate independently, but they remained on the board and kept their controlling shares.
So still a lot of influence behind the scenes.
Definitely. And outside of Google, Page has been involved in all sorts of interesting things.
Like what?
Well, he was an early investor in Tesla. He's put money into renewable energy technology. He's backed flying car startups like Kitty Hawk and Opener.
Flying cars.
That's wild.
I know, right? And he also founded this AI startup called Dynatomics, which is focused on optimizing manufacturing processes.
So still very much a tech visionary.
Oh, yeah. And he's interested in the bigger picture, too.
Yeah.
The impact of AI on society.
Right. Like, will AI create abundance? Will it lead to shorter work weeks? How do we deal with potential job displacement?
Exactly. Those are all things he's thought about.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also involved in setting up Singularity University, which explores the future of technology and its impact on humanity.
So thinking about the really long-term consequences.
Yeah. And on a personal level, he married Lucinda Southworth in 2007, who's a research scientist.
Yeah.
They have 2 kids together.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also a big fan of architecture and design.
Mm-hmm.
He bought a historic house in Palo Alto and built a super eco-friendly mansion next door.
It is. He also bought a super yacht called Senses in 2011.
Wow. Living the good life.
Yeah. And in 2013, he revealed that he had been dealing with vocal cord paralysis.
What happened there?
Well, he had a cold that paralyzed his right vocal cord, and then back in 1999, his left vocal cord was paralyzed for some unknown reason.
Wow, that's tough.
It is, and he ended up donating a lot of money to research on vocal cord nerve function.
Trying to help others with the same condition.
Yeah, and his family's philanthropic organization, the Carl Victor Page Memorial Fund, has also done some amazing things. Like, they donated $15 million to fight the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014.
That's incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a pretty private person, but he's definitely made a huge impact on the world.
No doubt about it.
And he's racked up a ton of awards and accolades along the way. He's been named a World Economic Forum Global Leader for Tomorrow. He got the Marconi Prize. He was even elected to the National Academy of Engineering.
All very prestigious honors.
They are. And he was even featured in the Showtime series Super Pumped.
So he's made it to Hollywood.
He has. So to sum it all up, Larry Page's story is pretty remarkable. He went from a curious kid with a passion for technology to one of the most influential figures of our time.
Absolutely. He had this incredible vision and drive, and he wasn't afraid to take risks.
Right, and his 10x mentality and his willingness to tackle these huge challenges are really inspiring.
Yeah, he really embodies that spirit of pushing boundaries and thinking big.
Totally. So I guess the question is, what 10x problem would you want to solve?
That's a good one.
Yeah, like what's the big, audacious goal that you're passionate about?
Something that could really make a difference in the world.
Exactly. And what would be the first step towards achieving it?
Yeah, what's that initial spark that gets things moving?
That's the Larry Page way of thinking, start with the big vision and then work backward to figure out how to get there.
I like it.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
My pleasure.